Hello there, it's me again, Robin. I'm back to continue weaving for you, dear listeners, my saucy and epic tale of violence, truth, and, most of all, rhinos. Please sit back, grab a glass of wine and a Mars bar, and enjoy my masterpiece. Rhino Men, Birth of Rhino Men, Chapter 3. The challenger standing before Rydian was an abomination. Its shirtless bipedal frame resembled a gray flesh-encased boulder underneath which sat enormous, unreasonable musculature which caused the skin to ripple and roll like a leather flag in a hurricane as the biceps, triceps, and pecs attempted to puncture their sickly gray sheath. Thickets of black hair like spider legs covered the creature's arms and chest, with the aforementioned rippling and rolling creating in Rydian's creative brain the image of an horrific, ungodly cornfield of bristling, tangled stalks. The tight white trunks it wore barely concealed its alarmingly large penis. If Cigarilli's tackle was named the Anaconda, then what would this massive sausage be called? Rydian wasn't concerned about such questions, although Dragonhawk Zero was no doubt having a ponder about it. Rydian now turned his brilliant eyes and brain to the creature's head. Indeed, it was the most defining and monstrous feature of the beast. From behind, one may have thought it a regular human head. It had 2 human ears and a greasy black mohawk like a zebra's mane, but if one was to circle around to observe the side profile of this strange creature, one would, and Rydian already had, observe an elongated gray snout protruding from the otherwise human head, complete with 2 large flaring nostrils and a thick, jagged horn some 20 inches long. It was some kind of rhino man. The dust was still falling on the crowd who stood now, awestruck, unsure whether to cheer at the absurdly horrifying spectacle or to kill themselves to be rid of the reality-shattering vision that they could now never unsee. The stalwart impulse pulsed throughout Rydian's body, infusing in him for just a split second a precognitive thought that allowed him to block the incoming unprovoked punch from the rhino man. The resulting shockwave blew 1 layer of denim off Rydian's body. Luckily, he always wore 2 jackets and 2 pairs of trousers.
Why are you attacking me?
Rydian calmly asked the creature as he held its fist in place with his own cruelly strong grip. He looked into the creature's eyes, those human eyes. Who did they remind him of?
Whoa now,
cried Cigarilli, stepping between the ludicrously powerful and terrifying beast and the rhino man.
We have warm-up acts. You two will be plenty acquainted once the Candlemaker has made his comeback. Gentlemen and ladies, our newest challenger and soon-to-be champion makes his debut tonight. Put your hands together for the Rhino Man.
So it was some sort of rhino man. The crowd seemed to quickly accept that a twisted mutant rhino half-breed arm wrestler was now a feature of the night and their lives in general, and quickly resumed cheering, drinking, and farting, while Cigarilli ushered on the first challengers and Rydian made his way back down to the bar to catch up with Dragonhawk Zero and clear out his backlog of the drinks his fans had bought for him in the last 1 minute. One quick look around, though, and Rydian could notice that everything was not all right. No, everything was not very all right at all. For one, the Rhino Man had picked up a club member and ripped her plane in 2. And for 2, the club was swiftly turning to chaos around him as the many club-goers began to scramble for the stairs in a vain attempt to escape the suddenly rampaging Rhino Man. One unfortunate chimpanzee who did reach the stairs found herself blocked by the velvet rope and was swiftly grabbed and squished to a quick death by the gruesomely hairy gray arm of the recently berserk Rhino Man.
What are you doing, Rhino Man?
Yelled Cigarilli as he unsheathed the sword hidden in his umbrella.
You work for me, you work for me.
He then repeated that again.
You work for me.
The towering Rhino Man, seemingly having a slight morsel of fondness for Cigarilli, perhaps due to his likeness to Danny DeVito, who exists as a real person in this universe, didn't kill him, only crushing every bone in his body and tossing him like a spent rag doll past the bar and into the retro video game arcade, destroying a time crisis unit in the process. Rydian finished off 12 more drinks that had been lined up for him at the bar as he watched the ensuing chaos. He was a little bit thirsty this evening.
This place is really going downhill,
he said to the barman, Chucky Balboza.
What's new?
Replied Chucky, the Chuckster Balboza. The 2 men laughed for about 20 seconds, being joined by Dragonhawk Zero after about 22 seconds.
Hey, what were you 2 laughing about? Forget it. I guess I needed to be there. So, what do you think? Should we stop that rampaging Rhino Man?
Rydian took another 7 sips of his drink before answering.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
Rydian backflipped from his sitting position on the bar stool and landed having turned 180 degrees midair, so he was now facing out into the club again. The Rhino Man, who had only killed around 20 people so far, was busy pummeling the pirate devil insane Simon Richardson against the hard stone wall as the Candlemaker attempted with his 100 years arm wrestling strength and experience to prize the beast away.
You take the lead, Rydian, and I'll back you up,
suggested Dragonhawk Zero, his glorious hair seeming all the more golden and resplendent than usual against the sodden backdrop of blood-soaked walls and brutalized chimpanzees.
You just go look after Cigarilli. I will have questions for him later.
replied Portcullis, breaking into a sudden breakneck run towards the Rhino Man. The Rhino Man must have used his human ears to sense the impending arrival of Rydian's ferocious attack, as it was able to dislodge the pirate devil insane Simon Richardson's spine with skull still attached from his body and whip it like a demonic yo-yo towards Rydian. Simon Richardson's skull shattered upon Rydian's own valorous forehead, bone fragments splintering into the mortified crowds who, without Cigarilli to give the go-ahead to unhook the velvet rope, were trapped fast. Charging through the skull, Rydian proceeded to grapple the Rhino Man, who stood 9 foot tall. This underground basement club had exceptionally high ceilings, which was one of the reasons Cigarilli had opted to open business here. However, the sheer size of the jumbo monstrosity meant that for the first time in his life, Rydian wasn't big enough. He couldn't clasp his thick, deadly fingers behind the monster's back. Hell, he could barely complete his intended reach-around maneuver at all. In the fraction of a second it took Rydian to acknowledge that his grapple had failed, the Rhino Man swiftly opened its disgusting broad mouth at the end of its gray rhino snout and bit Rydian's entire head. Rydian gave a soft grunt as the powerful rhino jaws clenched upon his robust, distinguished skull, 2 or 3 hairs from his perfectly permed mullet falling to the ground having been trimmed by the Rhino Man's gnashing jaws. He could feel his skin beginning to become indented by the beast's indomitable dentures. A lesser man would already be dead, Dragonhawk Zero was thinking as he attempted CPR on Cigarilli. As the bite pressure continued to mount upon Rydian's crown, the Rhino Man used its 4-meter arm span to wrap him into a would-be death cuddle. The stalwart impulse, which granted Rydian total synaptic and metabolic control, quickly expelled several sweat jets from his otherwise bone-dry yet healthily oily skin, producing enough lubrication to soften the Rhino Man's ironclad grip, and allowing Rydian to slide through the monster's grasp like a manly child on a water park flume.
This is where things get saucy,
Rydian said, half to himself and half to anyone who might have been in earshot. He then proceeded to grip the tree-like ankles of the absolutely huge Rhino Man and rip the creature's swollen size 59 UK feet off in one quick movement. Naturally, this led to the Rhino Man swiftly falling onto its now profusely bleeding stumps and sliding around almost comically as it attempted to find balance on the increasingly wet-with-blood nightclub floor. Once more, it let out a tortured yelp, 1/15th Frankenstein moan, 8/12ths hyena laugh, and the rest regular human scream. It gripped onto the moose head which adorned the club's wall, preventing itself from falling down as Rydian proceeded to wind up a finishing blow.
Stop!
Shouted Cigarilli feebly from the inside of the Time Crisis arcade unit. Rydian lowered his bloodthirsty fist. He'd learnt to always be ready to listen to reason, even during a melee or all-out war, which he had been involved in, flashbacks to come later in the story. The Rhino Man, hanging feebly, though still snarling monstrously from the prize moose, was losing a lot of blood now. Thick, dark rhino blood. It would surely die with or without Rydian's always lethal punch.
What is this thing, Cigarilli?
Asked Rydian, being passed a drink by Chucky Balboza. Cigarilli looked around from the inside of the Time Crisis unit at the petrified patrons which surrounded him. This was the end of him, he realized.
Let's get to my office and I'll tell you everything.
Chapter 4,
No, we talk here.
said Rydian, lighting 6 or 7 cigarettes.
And I don't have time for a whole rigmarole. Explain what this thing is and why it attacked me quickly and without any sort of life story attached.
Bones totally crushed, organs failing, asshole impaled on some of the inner circuitry of the Time Crisis arcade machine, Cigarilli didn't have much to lose in front of the terrorized clubgoers, waitstaff, and Rydian.
Okay, I'll tell you.
He began between piggish grunts, labored breaths, and occasional retro sound effects.
It's all your fault, Rydian. You were too damn good at arm wrestling. You beat everyone. I mean, 3,000 victories in 2 years, for Christ's sake.
4,000.
Interjected Dragonhawk Zero, ever a stickler for numbers and loyal to Rydian, who he considered his de facto leader.
Whatever, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, the crowds love you. Everyone does. Even I do, for God's sake. You're just incredible. But it's bad for business, you winning all the time. No one wants to see the same guy win every time. People get bored. People stop coming. If I let that happen, I'd be finished, Rydian.
Rydian looked at Cigarilli with absolutely zero empathy. Was he honestly expected to give a shit about this wannabe Danny DeVito's business troubles?
I said no rigmarole, and so far I'm getting a good amount of it,
said Rydian, not impatiently, as he was an incredibly patient man, just that his tolerance for rigmarole was naturally very low.
Okay, I'm sorry,
said Cigarilli, his broken little Danny DeVito body beginning to fail him.
So I needed to secure the business, find you some decent competition. Well, that's the problem. There isn't any man, woman, or even animal alive that could pose a threat to you, Rydian. I didn't have any options left. So I began asking around.
Rydian shot a glance at the Rhino Man as it lay now in the corner of the club, pools of dark blood expanding into the room from the stumps where its feet once existed. Its grotesque mouth frothed as it struggled to take its final difficult breaths. It appeared to be dying. Cigarilli now paused before continuing his longer than it needed to be explanation of how this Rhino man came to exist in the first place. Dragonhawk Zero began to do some push-ups.
You now have 1 minute to tell the rest of this story, or I'm going to slap you to death,
said Redian, getting really serious.
Okay. I found this scientist, Vivian something or other. She tells me she can make a super clone by splicing DNA of humans and various animals. You know, lions, dolphins, beasts of burden and the like, including rhinos.
Said Cigarilli very quickly, like a YouTube video on 1.5x speed.
Clone of whom?
Asked Redian. But he already knew. He had recognized those all-too-human eyes, deep set in the face of that monstrous Rhino man. Those distinguished eyes were crystal sharp like a pair of beautiful swords, wielded by an angel, piercing the eye holes in the Rhino man's otherwise displeasing visage. They were his eyes, Redian's eyes, his own eyes, his sexy dark eyes, his... Well, not his as they were not on his face, but they were identical eyes to Redian Portcullis, almost as if he were related to that now-dying Rhino man. Well, not that any of the creature's other features bore the same statuesque beauty as Redian's, except perhaps the sheer mass of the thing, but those eyes were very similar.
You cloned me,
he stated matter-of-factly, but with an undercurrent of blood-curdlingly murderous intent.
I'm sorry, I wanted the best arm wrestler in the world. I needed you, your DNA mixed with Rhino. It was the only way to keep my business alive, Redian. I swear it.
Makes sense,
said Dragonhawk Zero, always willing to look at things from multiple angles. It was one of the traits Redian admired the most in the aspiring bounty hunter and monster truck aficionado.
How did you get my DNA?
Spat Redian, his saliva spattering Cigarilli's face, especially his nose and mouth, as he combed his fingers through his tangle of sexy hair and chucked the ones which came free to the ground around him, as he always did. Cigarilli froze. Terror in his eyes, those Danny DeVito eyes asterisk. To be clear, even though Danny DeVito does exist in this world, Cigarilli's resemblance to him is not due to some sort of gene-slicing experiment or sperm donation which Danny DeVito may or may not partake in. It is purely coincidence, and one which the other characters in this world would certainly notice if they were familiar with Danny DeVito's works, which are largely the same as they are and are the reader's universe, although with one major omittance from his filmography. Danny DeVito, unfortunately, never made Matilda in this world, so please don't imagine him having acted in it while reading this, as that would be incorrect. And you can take that as canon as I am the author. Inside Redian's logical and well-ordered brain, a picture began to emerge. 6 months ago, the night Danielle was murdered. Redian had been out arm wrestling, but she'd stayed home. A novelist, she had been hard at work on finishing up her latest erotic masterpiece, Sex Lovers 3. Redian had read and even shadow-written good chunks of it. It was a sexual triumph. That night, that damn night, while he was here at this damn club, Danielle had been murdered.
That's why you offered me double pay for the arm wrestling match, which took place 6 months ago today.
Redian stated, unraveling the murder at last.
You lured me away from her.
I don't get it, Redian,
said Dragonhawk Zero, wildly out of his depth on this one.
That's right,
said Cigarilli, barely able to speak now with his collapsed lungs and fissured bumhole causing him considerable pain.
I admit it, I took your DNA the only way I knew how. I sent some henchmen to harvest your exceptional semen from inside Danielle's vagina.
Jesus Christ,
shouted one club attendee who found that method of DNA procurement particularly troubling.
And then I had her murdered so you'd never find out about it.
Finished Cigarilli, tears streaming from his Danny DeVito eyes. A weight seemed to lift from his voice, almost as if he had needed to get this off his chest.
I never meant to hurt you, Redian. Your arms have made me a lot of money, and of course you helped me meet my wife, Estelle.
Redian could have erupted there and then at this revelation, could have evaporated Hamilton Cigarilli and everyone else in this hellhole of a club with a barrage of punches rivaling the force of a meteor shower.
And of course you helped me reconnect with my estranged brother Peter,
continued Cigarilli. Yes, Redian Portcullis could have torn the foundations out of the old meat factory and toppled the whole damn place on top of them all as a form of suicidal recompense mirroring Samson in the Temple of Dagon. If he weren't so totally in charge of his reactions.
Not to mention the time you donated me one of your lungs.
Cigarilli jabbered on from inside the time crisis machine.
It was a miracle you had an extra one.
Redian maintained his cool in the face of his beloved Danielle's murderer. Yes, the stalwart impulse protected Redian from the pain that would make other men crumble, but mainly it protected everyone else from Redian's insurmountable rage. The rage he had lived with since that day exactly 6 months ago. The day when Danielle was murdered so that an arm-wrestling nightclub promoter could harvest Redian's semen from her vagina to be used in a gene-slicing experiment designed to create an arm-wrestling challenger worthy of challenging him in the ring to keep up interest in said arm-wrestling promoter's nightclub. The irony being that Rydian's uncontrollable rage at having discovered this ill-conceived plan would now far exceed any Rhino-based strength that may have once posed a tiny threat to him.
So why did the Rhino Man go berserk the moment he saw Rydian if he was only designed to arm wrestle him?
Asked Dragonhawk Zero, for once asking something semi-relevant.
I've got no idea,
said Cigarilli, now coming very close to death.
That might be something you'll never know.
Rydian shook his head, remembering that this was all being played out in front of a large, shocked crowd amidst a scene of abject horror. The Rhino Man was still alive and was snoozing quietly in the corner of the room, apparently tougher than Rydian had imagined. The beast's ankle stumps seemed to have cauterized themselves with some sort of rhino blood heat technique. Though it'd never walk again, it could still be dangerous. It was part him, after all. Crushed, gored, and mangled corpses of young, beautiful people littered the floor around the club. There was blood and shit everywhere. Rydian had seen a lot of bad shit in his life. This was in his top 20 worst things. Some of the crowd had begun to slowly edge their way towards the only exit still barricaded by the single velvet rope.
Let them go,
said Cigarilli to the brutish doorman, his voice now enfeebled as his life force dwindled.
I'm going to die anyway. Who cares what you people say outside these walls? Hell, who would believe this anyway?
Don't touch that rope,
commanded Rydian, removing the denim bandana from his head and placing it gently in his pocket.
You're not dying today,
he continued, taking off his immaculately clean denim jacket before folding it carefully and handing it to Chucky the Chuckinator Balboza to keep behind the bar. He continued speaking as he unbuttoned his denim waistcoat, which would also soon be handed to Chucky Chuckles Balboza for safekeeping, behind the bar also.
I'm going to get you to a doctor who can patch you up good as new. Then you're going to lead me to the cronies you paid to murder Danielle.
What are you going to do to them?
Asked Dragonhawk Zero, always curious about Rydian's revenge methods.
I am going to pulverize each of them with my bare hands, Dragonhawk Zero. You can come along to watch, and if any of these cronies have any active bounties, I wouldn't mind if you claim them.
Wow, Rydian, that is very kind of you. You're the best,
replied the always grateful Dragonhawk Zero.
It's not a problem. I want to support your dream to become a fully fledged bounty hunter, as I feel that with the right training, you could do a half-decent job, said
Rydian, softening momentarily for his deferential friend.
What about after that? What are you going to do once you track down the cronies I set on your girlfriend?
Asked Cigarilli, keen to know what Rydian had in store for him. He knew it probably wasn't too amazing for him.
Once I've dealt with those pieces of garbage, you're going to take me to this scientist who bastardized my family's genes to make this disgusting Rhino Man. Vivian something. Once I've dealt with her in whatever way seems appropriate, then, and only then, you die, Cigarilli.
Oh no,
said Cigarilli in earnest.
No, that's awful.
As for all of you,
said Rydian, turning around to face the crowds of people in the dank, bloody depths of the old meat factory,
you're all going to have to keep these events a secret. I don't want any of Cigarilli's henchmen knowing I'm coming for them. Especially as I am first going to take Cigarilli to a hospital to get him patched up good as new. That would give those dirty murderers a chance to leave town, and I don't want them to leave town. That would be inconvenient for me. Can I trust you all to keep this secret?
The crowd nodded respectfully in near-perfect unison. Rydian knew they wouldn't let the cat out of the bag. He was a good judge of character, and these 300 or so drunk gangsters, whores, guns for hire, sleazy businessmen, and crooked cops all seemed like they'd keep their word not to tell anyone about Rydian, the Rhino Man, Danielle's murder, or any of the other smaller, though still just as essential details of tonight's unexpected show. Conveniently for them, none of Cigarilli's henchmen were in the club tonight, as they were out on jobs for their newly paraplegic boss. Rydian picked up the Time Crisis machine, with Cigarilli's head poking out of the screen, slung it on his shoulder, and made his way casually, though with purpose, to the Rhino Man. The 9-foot beast must have weighed a ton, literally. But Rydian easily slung the beast on his other shoulder before making his way to that enormous door the Rhino Man had originally entered through. Dragonhawk Zero collected Rydian's pristine denim clothes with a smile of grateful diligence befitting a serf in the days of yore.
Hey, Chucky.
Rydian called out to Chuckin' Nuggets Balboza.
Yes, Rydian?
Replied Chucky Chuckle Vision Balboza as he scrubbed Rhino Man blood from the bar.
This round's on me.
Ooh, shouted the crowd as the music started up again. It had been a crazy 3 minutes. Okay, that ends chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed my story. See you soon for the next chapter.